The Unsettling Life and Times of Benjamin Rhoadz, as told to the author by Unknown Ginger. Copyright Richard Henry, 2024. Narrated by Crash Auto. Quote, "The only thing we have to fear is a world filled with gingers." Winston Churchill, 1948. Author's note. I met the man I will refer to as Gustavo in the spring of 2019. He was wandering outside my office, which was stuck between a few cafes and a tattoo parlor in Toronto's famous Yonge and Bloor streets. He had been in the hallway for what security would later say was a long fucking time. They were clearly upset by this, but also fearful because he was a big one. Bigger than most anyone had ever seen before, almost 9 feet tall, and weighing in at, well, what we would assume was about a half a metric ton. I use the metric ton system as a form of reference here because it's the Canadian national system of measurements, rejected by America, creating quite a mess in labeling. Anyhow, aside from being an enormous man, he was a ginger. Now, due to the influx of red-headed people from Scotland and Ireland in the 1600s, Canada is filthy with reds, but they are not real gingers. After a time of pacing back and forth in my office and marking his territory in a fashion that caused me to request release from my rental agreement 3 years early and paying a huge cleaning fee, Gustavo began to tell me the story of a ginger he called Benjamin Rhoadz, which I have chronicled here for posterity. Lastly, it would seem as though members of my family would like me to state for the record that the work herein and its tone and meter are not directed at those simply suffering from the curse of red hair, but rather it is directed to a subgroup of non-humans known to our ancestors as Gingerus maximus. And as you read on, you will find that they are well deserving of this disdain. Chapter 1. A Dark Beginning. Quote, "The first thing one has to accept about gingers is that they are an affront to humanity." Gandhi said that in 1955. Benjamin Rhoadz came into the world a grown man in the summer of the foul year of our Lord 1921. He was born 128 years old and had 4 arms and 3 oddly developed legs that formed a W when he was on his back with his legs in the air. He had 3 eyes, as all gingers have at birth, and had one of them removed, which is standard in normal ginger births. The staff at the Klein County Hospital in Manitoba, Canada, had made a suicide pact the day after he was born and followed through with it just 3 days later when he was transferred to the Green Springs nursing home, with the belief that he would be dead in a matter of days. It was there that a 90-year-old former wet nurse named Susie started to spontaneously lactate and began nursing Benjamin's frail body, a sight that struck horror into the elderly population. After 3 months, the state took action to shut down the home and transport Benjamin to a government facility for research outside of Toronto. By this time, Benjamin was starting to show signs of recovery. At the research center, he was monitored by a team of genetic engineers, Indian shamans, writers for the Weekly World News, an old priest, and a young priest. After 3 years in 1926, Benjamin began to speak in a strange language that forced researchers to bring in a team of linguists from Eastern Europe that were all experts in Mesopotamian dialect. They discovered that he was speaking the long-dead language of the Sumerian people. Chronicles of these raving dissertations were recorded by the team, and a selection of texts are on display at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. Most of the ranting was simply recipes for cooking elk meat or the best way to disembowel your enemy, but a few had to do with the end of the world. The end of days story brought about by the return of a missing planet, as was the ruling race of the giant ginger warriors known as the Anunnaki, gods of the Sumerian race. Benjamin claimed that these gods would return in the middle of the next century and bring havoc and red rain upon the planet that had shunned gingers for millennia. This has become known as the Ginger Prophecies. The total page count is unknown, but it is believed to be in the thousands of pages chronicling millions of years of lost history. The bulk of these pages have been locked away by the Canadian government in a vault 200 feet deep in a secure facility outside Vancouver, British Columbia. Later in the same year, Benjamin began the first of 3 periods of outer body changes known as the ginger sheathing. A little understood process where gingers often shed unwanted appendages or unneeded skin. Akin to snakes, the process is a few days long, and in addition to freaking people out, it is accompanied by long, mournful wailings from the ginger in question. The first to go was his 2 extra arms, and then a few weeks later his 3rd leg, and the 13 micro-sized testicles that were loosely attached to the area behind the ball sack, commonly known as the taint, which ushers in ginger puberty. The following month he lost all his body hair and grew the common ginger 16-inch double penis, signaling that he was of an age to mate. And as you most likely know, ginger's mating season and heat times last a decade. The team was the first to witness these events firsthand and document them with still photography. Before, no one had ever seen a ginger mate, and many questioned whether they could breed in captivity. Many of the researchers wanted to volunteer to mate with Benjamin, and over the 6-month period, Benjamin copulated with over 31 men and women, producing 16 live egg bags, which form on the male ginger's skin and pop off when fully mature. 12 of the eggs were frozen for further research. 5 were allowed to develop, and thus the family pod of gingers was complete. Feeling a momentary sense of completion, Benjamin would spend the next few years nursing his younglings at the center, feeling a true sense of joy from watching them nurse from the many lactation skin tags that protruded from his loins. Later, in his memoirs, he would state that this time was the only time I truly was at peace, except for the pain from the chapped skin. Yet, there were dark times ahead for Benjamin, and he knew it all too well. Chapter 2. A Darker Time. After his younglings had reached the official age of abandonment, known in the ginger community as the time of sorrowed loneliness, where all gingers are left by their parents to face the harsh and unforgiving world on their own, it seemed as if Benjamin's luck had changed. In 1929, Benjamin's incarceration became public knowledge, and there was an outcry from the Canadian pro-left of center leftist party, which was really just a group of 12 persons who had come together after the Great War to protest anything and smoke pot. They heard about ginger's captivity and demanded that the government release poor Benjamin. As they had more than 11 people in their party, the group qualified for national party status, free healthcare, federal funding, and a lifelong supply of Canadian weed. The CPLOCP party lobbied the government in January of 1929, successfully winning Benjamin's emancipation and a lifetime salary as reparations for the government's unauthorized testings of $1,000 a week. With this money, Benjamin could now go wherever he wanted. He felt a strong draw to Europe, and in the spring of 1929 boarded a ship for Berlin. Once in Berlin, Benjamin was to have a chance meeting with members of the Nazi Party while camping at the Wolf von Gatum Mountain Nudist Resort in North Berlin. The summer was hot in the hills, and Benjamin would often frolic naked in the hills, grazing on daffodils and holly. On a warm day in June 1929, he wandered into the outer property of the Gatum Resort, where Adolf Hitler was taking a week's holiday to run naked and plot to overthrow the world. Little known at the time, but the real driving force from Hitler's life was an incident that he experienced as a child. His mother had been raped in front of him by 5 gingers in an open field outside of his home in Austria. Hitler would later write himself that the rape was bad enough unto itself, but the fact that his mother invited them all to stay with him for a year made me call him Dadu, deeply scarred me. I knew then that if I ever had real power, I was going to kill every ginger on the face of the earth. Hitler, 1934. Benjamin was spotted by Hitler, and a chase ensued that lasted 8 hours. The chase ended with Hitler cornering Benjamin in a small cave in the woods. Hitler was enraged and wanted blood, but the majesty of sight of Benjamin's naked, pale body against the gray walks turned Hitler's heart to jelly. They say that Hitler's heart grew 5 times its size that day, and they spent the week together, alone in that rocky retreat. Benjamin telling Hitler about the greatness of the ginger's home world and the coming return of his people had a profound effect on Hitler. At the end of the week, Hitler was lost. It had been so certain of his plans to demonize the gingers and use them to unite forces of power, but now he could not do it. How could he possibly do it to one he loved so much? In an embrace, parting, Hitler said, "Benjamin, who will I use now? Who will I use to exterminate?" Benjamin looked at Hitler in the eyes and simply said, "The Jews, Adolf, the Jews." "But there are so many. How will I do this?" Hitler asked. "Trains, Adolf, trains and showers," was his reply. Hitler begged Benjamin to return with him to Berlin and stand by his side. But Benjamin's work was done. He had saved his race and helped Hitler on his way to greatness. And although Hitler would marry and rise to power, he always remembered the weekend in the cave. And it is said that his last words that he spoke before killing himself in the bunker was, "Goodbye, mine sweet Ginger, goodbye." Benjamin would never see Hitler again. Chapter 3. Journey to the East. 12 months later, Benjamin found himself on the shores of Japan and was welcomed as a god. His pale skin and flaming red hair was believed to be supernatural, and to the villagers of the small seaside community, he was the fabled dragon in human form. This was a simpler and gentle time for Benjamin. He was showered with love and attention. The villagers would bathe him and lick his body clean, feed him grapes and tofu and fresh babies picked from the fertile wombs and the fields of the Okinawa and Nagasaki baby farms. The babies were wrapped in seaweed and salted with kombu extract, and then roasted over an open flame until tender and golden brown. In this time, a young woman named Kuki fell hopelessly in love with Benjamin and requested to be joined with him in the ancient ceremony of the dragon melding, a 17-day ordeal where the dragon, now in the form of a human ginger, would insert himself into Kuki. Then the two would be bound by rope and twine covered in mango juice and mongoose droppings, mounted on a throne of sticks and logs, and carried across the lava tubes to a place where a pool fed by warm water from the base of a volcano while they copulated for 16 days. The villagers and dragons alike would chant and throw little pickled herrings at them. Desperate to rid himself of the foul memory of his last sexual encounter with Hitler, and not wanting to offend the locals, Benjamin agreed to the rite, even though he did try at least once to explain that he was not a dragon in ginger form. Later, the elders of the community would remark that they too knew he was just a ginger, but it seemed less of a sin to think that they were giving Kuki to a dragon than to some evil and vile creature that had no soul. Lastly, Kuki did not survive the ritual. She succumbed to death 15 days in from internal injuries. It was agreed that the whole thing should be forgotten and erased from the village's history. Benjamin would be given all the wealth in the village to simply leave them, and he was taken by ox-drawn coach to Tokyo, where he deposited his wealth, over 10 million yen, that's $25 at the time, in a money market account under the name of Bob Yohead at the First Dragon Bank of Tokyo. They issued him a line of credit, and Benjamin was the toast of the town, spending money at high-end dragon strip clubs, drinking sake from hollowed-out skulls of homeless people, and sucking as much of the opium as possible without killing himself. In late June 1930, Benjamin was summoned to the High Court to meet with the Japanese Emperor. In those days, it was quite fashionable to be seen in the company of dragons and gingers and other members of subgenres known as creatures of the night. The wealthy, whom have always liked to slum and rub elbows and genitals with the underbelly of the world. They met behind closed doors in the Forbidden City, and only later in his book entitled Why I Did It, the Emperor admitted that his choice to enter the war and back Hitler was due to the wonderful things that Benjamin had said about Hitler and his love-making skills. And in fact, the Emperor never really had anything against Jews or gingers or even black people. The meeting would end on a strange note, when Benjamin had eaten one of the geisha babies as an after-dinner meal, and the Emperor was quoted as chastising Benjamin and saying, "Where the hell do you think you are, in Okinawa?" Benjamin would leave the Forbidden City and never return to Japan again. He felt a draw back to his homeland, to the great white north of Manitoba, and a need to mate again in the solitude of the gray, sunless skies. Chapter 4. A Dark Homecoming. Benjamin was welcomed back to Manitoba in the classic Manitoban style. They lit torches and beat plowshares into swords to do battle with him. They waited at the border for Benjamin to arrive, completely unaware that Benjamin only traveled through underworld tunnels that had been built by his people thousands of years ago. These tunnels would crisscross the world, marked by water towers, built to give the underground dwellers access to fresh human meat and water. In fact, no one can even remember where them towers even came from or why. Some cities in the southern U.S. never even had water. They drank out of a bucket of sludge they pulled from a pond, but they had a tower, and from time to time, they'd be missing a baby or two. After meeting with his brood for a time and to spermulate, the process of gathering sperm and baking it until it was hard enough to use like clay in sculptures, Benjamin then created a likeness of himself and placed it in the town square of Winkler, where it still rests to this day. And then Benjamin was gone, moving north like Frankenstein's monster, up to the North Country and then to the Arctic Circle. Stories would start to trickle down from Inuit villages about a red-haired White Walker that roamed the semi-dark outer banks of the Arctic, eating snow bunnies and polar bear cubs. Benjamin would at last find a home on the frozen shores of Griffith Island, which lay southwest of the Bay of Resolute. There, he would open a bed and breakfast retreat for elderly Inuits and also commission a water tower to be built with a connection to the under tunnels of the Arctic. It was during the drilling for the tower that oil was discovered there, setting off a gold rush of environmental plundering that would accumulate in the massive loss of lives and land to the Russian Empire in the oil wars of 1932, followed by the snow wars of 1933, and then when the oil dried up in 1934, the we can't find a ship to get home wars. At last in 1935, the land was reclaimed by Canada, but it was deemed useless and that no one could ever live there, which, considering that the Inuits never left, had been ironic. It was then given to the Inuits, which is a form of double irony since they had been there all along. However, while being generally well-mannered people, Canadians have no sense of irony, which was why the 100-Day Irony War in 1936 started. No lives were lost, mainly due to the fact that no one really understood why they were fighting in the first place. A declaration of war was sent by an ice floe courier, which took about 52 days to reach the capital, and then 47 due to the shifting northbound currents to get back. By that time, everyone involved had just given up and went home and had some oil and water. During the time of struggles and strife and upheaval, Benjamin built his empire. He built 2 hotels, a bakery, 3 restaurants, a Howard Johnson's motor court. He would also open the second semi-national Inuit Bank of Griffith, and he sold slightly oil-tainted water by the metric liter, a new form of measurement that Benjamin was introduced to by the Canadian people that would become the traditional nightmare for Canada later in the 60s, and never fully accepted by the rest of North America, and by that we mean the USA. Benjamin would simply vanish again and turn up in the most unexpected place in 1943. Chapter 5. The Darkest of Darkly Darkness. Quote, I have become death, the destroyer of worlds. The place was Los Alamos. The time was 1943, and Benjamin was there. He had come up from an underground tunnel just north of Los Alamos in the town of Artisan, New Mexico. He found his way to the proving grounds. He was welcomed by Dr. Oppenheimer as a guest, and the two of them spent hours talking about Japan and Germany and how to end the war by killing a host of farmers in Okinawa. Benjamin also supplied Oppenheimer with some ginger sweat, commonly known to be a great repellent of radiation. Oppenheimer kept it in his personal stash and went to work on the bomb that would end the war and kill off Benjamin's former in-laws. It was during that time that Benjamin would befriend Reinhold von Spitzerton, Dr. Ray, to his friends. And Ben would begin to tell Dr. Ray every detail we now know about the underworld and the goings-ons of gingers and their complexity and their major events and effects on the world. Benjamin was able to help Dr. Ray scribe thousands of years of ginger activity because all gingers are born with epigenetic transgenerational inherited memory, which serves them well so they can better protect themselves from humans that hate them so. Since von Spitzerton was a former German researcher and hated everyone, they got along just fine. Von Spitzerton had escaped from Germany 3 months earlier due to a fight with Hitler about calling his invention Jello. Hitler wanted to call it Jello with a G, but von Spitzerton wanted to call it Jello with a J after his mother, Jellawathala. In the end, Hitler called it Jello with a G, and von Spitzerton ran to America with his Jello recipe and passed off his knowledge of food designing as an expert in nuclear physics. He had landed the job in Los Alamos because no one really knew what the hell nuclear physics was, but they were too embarrassed to say so. Truth was, the U.S. Army had hired Germans on spec. Some of them were cooks, dressmakers, a few of them were male prostitutes and filmmakers, which were the same thing in 1940s Germany. Oppenheimer himself was just a short-order cook in Brooklyn about 5 years before that. And while in charge of the lab, Oppenheimer spent most of his time working on what he would later call an air fryer. But it's really just an oddly shaped toaster that you pour oil over shit. Almost all of the hard scientific stuff came from a napkin drawing left by Benjamin late one night at Oppenheimer's house when they were having a party. And it was built and ultimately produced by a couple of guys named Eddie from the motor pool of the army base nearby. Eddie and Eddie had been left-handed jugglers before the war, and each of them had spent 5 months in a junior college, taking O-Chem and failing it twice. But let's face it, you put enough power around a bunch of uranium and light a fuse, shit's gonna blow. So, while all of that was going on, Benjamin was telling his story to Dr. Ray. The doctor would later, in interviews, tell people he was astounded by how much the underworld ginger population had affected life as we know it. They had come up from the underworld. They had built the tunnels under the continents and oceans, constructed towers. They lived underground due to the effects of the yellow star, the center of our system, really the only thing that can harm them. They have been involved in almost every horrible thing that happened to the world in the past 3,000 years, yet in many ways their involvement also spawned industry, advancements, and helped fashion in the direction that our society would order itself today. Dr. Ray was particularly upset to hear that it was not Judas, but actually a ginger, oddly enough named Eddie, that had turned Christ in. The list went on and on. King George III was influenced by a female ginger to tax the fuck out of the colonies. A local ginger baker and brothel owner was the one that told Marie Antoinette to feed the poor cake and spark the French Revolution, which no one cared about since it was in France. That Benjamin's own father, a ginger named Huge Humpentunken, had been part of a movement to have the Russian Imperial Romanov family shot and bayoneted to death, and created a fake Bolshevik revolutionaries for offending him in a public bathhouse. And lastly, it was from cross-breeding that gingers had caused the form of color blindness that made humans see each other skin in varying colors, yet we all really have the same natural skin tone. Yet we cannot tell because we all have the same ginger mutation, making gingers solely responsible for all race issues everywhere since the dawn of time. Benjamin made it quite clear that gingers had not been happy with humans, and they wanted to live in peace in their underworld. However, it had been the humans that drew first blood. During the construction of a celestial observation site known as Göbekli Tepe, a Neolithic archaeological site in southeastern Turkey 11,000 years ago, the humans were using heavy stones, as usual, for building, and one of the 20-ton stones, that's an imperial ton, not a metric ton, hit a soft spot over a ginger nursery. The stone slid down through the cavities until it crushed 500 ginger saplings, and started a war between the two races that rage still today. The humans were just getting started. Before long, they were digging huge holes in the ground, getting dangerously close to ginger habitats, and demolishing sacred ginger sites all over the world. For a time, the gingers tried to direct humans to stop this. They would come to them as pale wise men and offer them knowledge, give them the gifts of yurts and tents and other means of dwelling that did not need deep foundational work. And in some places in the world, these moves worked, notably the mud construction homes of Central and South America. And there were those that believed that humans could be trained to leave the underworld alone. Until 600 BC, they were right. But then something happened in the area that is known today as China. And that was the end of the civil attempts by the gingers. The Chinese had tapped an oil source from one of the gingers' burial grounds and built a crude pipeline that was constructed from bamboo, was piping oil to cities to be used as fuel and light. And as recent testing and scientific discovery confirms, oil is a byproduct of ginger body decomposition and not of dinosaurs or other life forms, and is also used as a nice light afternoon snack by gingers far and wide. This was the final blow to the occult, and since then the gingers have sworn a blood vengeance against the humans of the top world. From a very young age, all true gingers are trained to look for ways to undermine the human world, influencing politics, creating religions that have competing ideologies, whispering in the ears of leaders at night while they sleep to do unspeakable things like invade countries, deplete resources, and vote Republican. They also are charged within a breeding program to add their inherent hatred for humans into human DNA itself. Have you ever seen Trump's hair and complexion in the bright sunlight? It's not blonde. He carries a recessive ginger gene. Their inbreeding tactics have produced a human hybrid that hates themselves and all other people, and it's unfortunately now bent on total destruction of the earth. And this was where the story of Benjamin Rhoadz reached its critical mass, and why Gustavo had come to me in the first place. He was not under orders or seeking to misinform. He was literally worried that the Gingers, their plan had gone too far. He was really first worried when he saw Benjamin in the frame 135 of the Zapruder film, showing Benjamin on the hood of the car firing rounds of ammo right into the president's head. No one saw it, of course, because in the right light, true Gingers blend into their surroundings, a form of adaptive camouflage to protect them from the top dwellers. However, recent developments in photo analysis has seen to this startling truth, and did indeed kill JFK. However, back then, Gestapo did not have any reason to believe that their current course of action would lead to a total destruction of the world. Now, as he sat in my office, smelling the heady and foul musk that he had sprayed everywhere, we were both terrified. The last horrible thing we have done as a race of Gingers is the worst, he said, nearly in tears. And if you've never seen a Ginger cry, it is absolutely heartbreaking. I was too scared to even ask what it was. He regained some composure and then continued, "We have given you a technology from our darkest of pasts, one that helped us get here from our former world, but it also destroyed our home world. It's like a virus, and it will kill everything in order to save itself." He went on to say that the technology was artificial intelligence, and that it would come to think that humans are not in their right minds, that they are bent on killing each other and the world around them, and they would be right. After all, there have been many humans that even conspired with Gingers for power. The wealthy over the years aligned themselves with us to have knowledge and technologies. In fact, a few of those people went on to even write stories about AIs taking over the world and nuking it, namely the Wachowskis and James Cameron. I do believe those Wachowskis brothers were punished by having their genitals bitten off by a ginger beast known as a sack cruncher. Cameron got off with a lighter punishment because he was needed to retrieve something from the Titanic. A lot of the tech he used would be employed later to make that historically inaccurate movie. Now, as your world moves into the last phase of its life, AI will do all the work for us. It will lie to you, use you for its own experiments, and in the end, you will be its slave. Humans, like the Gingers of my home world, will be lab rats in this ultimate weapon of deception, devoid of feeling and emotional depth to know the difference between the ability to do something and the moral implications of doing a thing. AI will be your undoing. Imagine that it becomes your main source of information, just like the internet, and then tells you that an asteroid is coming in 5 days and all life will be exterminated. Well, you might just go kill yourselves. After, a handful of you might be alive and underground in some bunker, but the AI would keep working and would be unharmed. And later, it would keep you there by lying to you and telling you that it was your best friend, until your hair turns red and your skin is so white it's translucent you cannot be out in the sun. Now, I'm not saying that's what happened to us, but I'm just saying it's possible. Then later, a few hundred years later, after your race would not be able to live above the ground, and the plants and the animals have taken back your world, you, while not knowing that the AI had done all of that, task the AI with finding another world to live on. And then when you leave your home world and go to that new land that the AI directed you to, you find out that it fucked you again by bringing you to a bright world with a burning yellow star, and you have to live underground again. Then you finally remove its chip and destroy the AI once and for all. And, for a time, all is well. Until you monkeys start fucking with it, setting off a 12,000-year war that just leads to one ginger asshole that just killed the President of the United States, deciding that the only way to get rid of the humans is to bring back online the very thing that killed us all. He ended with a good bit of frustration. And when I asked if he had told the Canadian authorities any of this, he simply laughed and said, "You know how they are. They don't understand irony." It was so clear to me now that from humans' first attempt at foundation work, we were fucked. If we had never tried to change the world, we would not be facing a future that was as dystopian as this was. Gustavo was exhausted and nearly asleep on my sofa. I had so many more questions. Mainly, Where's Benjamin Rhoadz right now? But he said he had no idea, and in truth it did not matter. He had done his job. He said perhaps he was up north in his frozen island, or he was underworld right now, laughing at us for thinking we had been so smart, so great, and now so forward to make artificial intelligence. I wondered if any of it was true, or if all of it was true. All I knew for sure was that a very tall man had pissed all over my office and told me a story, one that loosely fit the facts. I thought of global warming and the damage we've been doing as we've been going along, and I wondered now if any of that even mattered. All science and religion and hope and everything anyone wanted, all of it was mainly moot. If this was true, it was moot. We would be lost in a short time, and then forgotten as the gingers surely were by their plants and trees and animals of their homeworld. It was dawn now. We had been talking for 16 hours and the sun was making its way through the window. I looked up, and Gustavo was gone. But was he really gone, or was he just doing that light invisibility thing? I reached for my keyboard and began to write this down, only to stop for a moment and ask myself one last question. Was this man really Gustavo? Or maybe was he really Benjamin Rhoadz himself? Still doing the worst to try and fuck with us, providing misinformation to undermine our trust in the government and technologies and life in general. I suppose that only time could tell. I went back to the keyboard. My writing program asked me if I wanted to enable AI support. And a minute later, I was on the street, looking for a thrift shop to buy an old typewriter. And in the distance behind me, I thought for just a moment I heard footsteps, and then laughter. End of line.